In fact, U.S. President Barack Obama's political allies have praised his stance at the climate summit. The top-ranking Democratic Senator Harry Reid lauded Obama's, quote, leadership, while his counterpart in the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, said Obama had, quote, secured a critical agreement in Copenhagen. Well, now, Brazil. That was one of the key supporters of the Copenhagen Accord, and it's been the leading developing nation fighting for funding to help poor countries battle the effects of global warming. Well, our correspondent, Gabriel Elizondo, is in Sao Paulo. He joins us now live. Gabe, how is Brazil signing the deal affecting its relations with other countries, considering that many of them spoke out against it?
Yeah, Brazil really had no other option. I mean, if you get the Brazilian leaders and negotiators in a room, they're going to say, "Listen, what was our backup plan? We didn't have any other options." And the reason is because the countries of the ALBA group, such as Bolivia and Venezuela, they can take their cards off the table and say, "We're not going to play ball anymore." But the difference is with Brazil, with over half the Amazon being here in Brazil, and Brazil being the real diplomatic and economic force in Latin America, they have to play ball. They have to stay in this negotiation. So it's going to cause some friction in the short term, but in the long term, I think everybody understands here that Brazil has been clear. They do not like this agreement out of Copenhagen at all, but they're going to go forward because they simply have to.
Okay, that's on the political level, but what about on the level of the street? I mean, how is this deal going down with ordinary people in Brazil?
Well, there's two things here. I mean, let's remember that this is a very complex summit. This was a very complex thing they were trying to resolve there with climate change. Many of the people we spoke to simply said, "I read the paper, I read what they decided, but I simply don't understand it." That's number one. The other people that you speak to, the NGO types, the very well-read people here that have really been following the issue closely, they say it was an absolute disaster and a failure, and that most of them were very unimpressed with the final outcome. But to get a little bit more detail on this and to get a little bit more depth on this, we went out on the streets late yesterday and today and asked people exactly that question, and this is what they had to say.
Ricardo Cardim is preparing to head out to make the city of Sao Paulo a little more green. This is how he spends his free time, going around the city and planting trees in public areas. He does this by himself, without authorization from the city and with no outside funding. It's his personal passion. Nobody invited the 31-year-old to Copenhagen, which is fine by him, because he is not impressed with the final outcome.
Primeiramente, a gente perdeu uma grande chance de fazer algo pelo nosso planeta.
I think we lost a big chance to do something for our planet. The climate situation is an emergency situation. When we know this, the scientists are trying to warn us that the temperatures are rising at least 2 degrees and could cause a tragedy. The world leaders had a chance to come up with a strong common agreement, saving our future generations, and they didn't.
Most people we spoke to in Sao Paulo viewed the Copenhagen Agreement unenthusiastically, at best.
Eu acho que se falou muito até agora, né? Existe uma preocupação.
I think they spoke a lot in Copenhagen. I think there was a big concern, but nothing was done. Now we need a more concerted effort for the issue. There is still a lot to be done to prevent climate change, because we see things happening all over the world.
A princípio é show de política.
Copenhagen was a political show because the powerful have their own interests. And those interests don't allow things to work like they should.
As Ricardo updates his environmental blog, he says he understands the message from Copenhagen perfectly well.
E nós vamos pagar as consequências.
We are going to pay for this lack of agreement in 2009 in the future. It's very serious. I am really disappointed by this chance that was given in Copenhagen and that the leaders did not know how to fully take advantage of it.
Que foi dado em Copenhagen e os líderes não souberam aproveitar.
Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera, Sao Paulo.
Well, one of the key players in the accord was China, whose chief climate negotiator Xi Jinping praised the deal. He said both sides have managed to preserve their bottom line, and for the Chinese, this was based on their sovereignty and national interest. Melissa Chan is in Beijing.
Now, it's one of those interesting facts that 1,000 new vehicles hit the streets of Beijing every single day. This is a country that has seen a lot of development over the past 3 decades, and the people here can see the environmental effects. Here in Beijing, you can breathe the pollution and see the pollution. So the people are very aware, and China has been very vociferous over the past 2 weeks in Copenhagen about what the rest of the world needs to do. They are a developing country, and they've placed the onus on the United States and Europe to do something about climate change. Now, joining me here today is Mr. Si Pengcheng of Greenpeace China. Mr. Si, I want to know, are the Chinese happy with the results of Copenhagen?
China is not happy with the result of Copenhagen because Copenhagen looks like it's going to fail to reach a legally binding agreement with a strong target coming from the developed countries to tackle climate change. And China wants to reach that agreement in Copenhagen because it knows that climate change, if unchecked, is going to have a huge impact on China. China is going to see the food shortage becoming much more serious. Water scarcity is going to become much more serious for China. And China sees that, and China wants to have an agreement which can tackle climate change in the future decades.
Now, here in China, people have been following the news coming out of Copenhagen. There is a sense that you need to be environmentally responsible. Now, the Chinese government, of course, again, have said that the United States and Europe are the ones who are most responsible, but everyone does realize that the issues at stake are very important.
I feel what China has said during Copenhagen demonstrates its new position as a world leader. We are no longer weak. China has the power to talk and dares to speak against the US, and it is now a responsible global player.
I hope to drive less and cycle more as a contribution. We should try for moderation in our personal activities.
So everyone is concerned about the environment, but from the Chinese point of view, they do feel that they have given quite a bit to the effort, and it's up to the rest of the world to step up for the rest of the commitment. Melissa Chan, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
And there's been strong reaction to the climate accord from Africa, with Sudan describing it as a suicide pact. African leaders had been urging richer countries not to condemn the continent to wallow in misery and chaos through no fault of its own. Mohamed Ado has more from Kenya's capital, Nairobi.
It's the continent that contributes least to climate change, but Africa is suffering the greatest damage. Harvests are declining and droughts and floods are striking the continent with greater frequency. In the Horn of Africa, millions go hungry after livestock, their mainstay, has been decimated. Women and young girls spend many hours and at times days in search of water. Climate change has also made food more scarce, leading to about 150,000 deaths per year, according to the World Health Organization. And at the Copenhagen Summit on Climate Change, these people's misery seems to have fallen on deaf ears. It's no wonder, therefore, that African climate activists have greeted with anger a draft resolution at the summit. They argue that the deal provides no confidence that the catastrophic climate change will be averted.
It's a question of life and death. It's a reality of your ability to be able to organize your life and actually live or not. If you are moving people from having 100 goats to having nothing, what have you moved those people to? That is, you've made them more destitute. You're moving them actually to an early death.
African negotiators went to the summit with huge expectations. A deal for cuts in greenhouse gas emissions and a concrete financial plan on how to help the continent deal with climate change. African climate activists are also unhappy that South Africa was involved in the brokering of the accord. They say it presented a break from the unified African position.
The South African interests are procyclic within the capital class. It considers itself within the regime of the global forces of finance and economic architecture that are actually responsible to the crisis that we are speaking about. So certainly the South African position in that draft is not the Kenyan, Ethiopian or Sierra Leonean position. It's not.
For Africa's negotiators, the debate on climate change is far from over. They now have their eyes set on more duels in Mexico City in a year's time. Mohamed Ado, Al Jazeera, Nairobi, Kenya.
And you can read up on all that's unfolded in Copenhagen, reaction and opinion from around the world, by heading to our website. There it is, the address, aljazeera.net/English. It's our top story, of course, and you can go to our dedicated climate page. Click on the icon on the right-hand side for blogs and reports from our correspondents around the world.